My name is Allison, and I work at MICA, the Michigan Coalition on Homelessness. I'm the manager of partner training, support, and engagement. Today's presentation is from Safe and Just Michigan on the Clean Slate initiative. So we hope that's what you're here for, because that's what we're going to tell you all about. We have a chat feature, which you're welcome to use, but we request that you put the questions in the Q&A. Well, we will be taking questions throughout that are applicable to the content at the time. Any that are more broad, I will be saving till the end. So we would love it if you could use the chat function and the Q&A. With that, I am going to remind you that this is being recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube page later. Just so you know, what that means is that you're being recorded. If your camera's on, that's being recorded. If you type into the chat, that's being recorded, as well as if you do a one-on-one chat to someone. So let's say I chat Eleanor, who also works at MICA, that will be downloaded as well. I don't read those, but just for full transparency, those do exist. All right, so we're going to start off with a video, and as soon as the video ends, I'm going to pass it over to John and Camus, who are here today from Safe and Just Michigan to present to us.
One of the downfalls of having a family, you are denied apartments, you are denied jobs. They put a lot of stress on me. That affects home, it affects your life with your children, and I love being a mommy. I've never touched a gun, I've never fired a gun before. The whole thing is just so very hard to talk about. My brother, I knew he was a street guy before I moved in with him. So I remember that night clearly. My brother was shot, he was bleeding. I dropped him off at the emergency, and a police car pulled behind me. He asked, "Is there a gun in the car?" And I'm like, "No, there's no gun in the car, officer." And he asked me to get out the car. And when I picked up my purse, I could feel the weight of a gun. It felt like gravity just pulled everything down to me. After I got that felony on my record, I applied for 2 apartment buildings that I really wanted to move into. And when my background check came back with the felony on it, I was blanket denied entry into those apartments. It stayed on my record for 6 long years. I like my new apartment. It feels amazing. My full kitchen, which I am going to enjoy, because at my last apartment, my kitchen was so small that I didn't get to do all the baking and stuff I want to do. The best day of my life was absolutely giving birth to my children, but the second best day of my life was getting a second chance in life, that expungement.
It looks like we may have gotten into some technical difficulties there.
Sorry, I couldn't hear there for a minute. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Hi, I'm John Cooper. I'm the executive director of Safe and Just Michigan, and I'm joined here by Kamal Sandiford, our Clean Slate program manager, who's actually the person who put us in touch with Erica and helped her out in an expungement fair in the Lansing area. And Erica's case is really a microcosm of what the Clean Slate law is all about. It is about helping people who are held back by old criminal records get a second chance at life. And Kamau and I are going to talk today about sort of the background of the Clean Slate Law, where it came from, the issues it was trying to solve, how big of a problem public criminal records really are, and also how to access services, how to help clients access services, what the legal standards for getting a record cleared are, and the like. So jumping right in, if we go to the next slide. So you'd be surprised. I mean, maybe not you guys, because of the population you serve, but most people would be very surprised by the number of people in the US that have criminal records. And it's estimated that about 1 in 3 working age adults have criminal records, and that about a quarter of all those records are felony records, which, as you probably know, are the ones that have the most of an impact on a person's access to good employment and housing opportunities. And there are collateral consequences from a criminal record that run across the legal system. It's not just sort of private actors that impose problems on you. You can't get an occupational license if you've got a certain kind of a criminal record in many cases. It's hard to get a business license and commercial liability insurance if you have a criminal record. There are issues around accessing public benefits. Michigan actually just it's 2 Decembers ago, finally used a waiver and passed a law to allow people with felony drug convictions to access food stamps, because there was a 90s era law that said if you have in excess of 1 drug conviction on your record, you are lifetime banned from using the SNAP program. And that's just one example of many. Colleges ask about criminal convictions. Many do try to interview the individual with records before denying admission, but it's a real access issue as well. And beyond sort of employment and housing, which are the main areas we talk about, and obviously housing is chief concern for this group. Driver's license access is an issue. We've heard from people who weren't able to volunteer at their kids' school because they've got a felony record, and chaperone field trips, coach the baseball team. So there's a ton of impacts from a single criminal record, and it tends not to matter how old it is or sort of what the actual sort of extenuating circumstances around the conviction were. Next slide, please. So this is a problem states have known about for a very long time. People have been doing background checks based on old court records for decades. And the impact of that on an individual's ability to get a second chance has been well documented for a long time. So Michigan has had a court process that exists to petition for expungement since the mid-1960s. But that process is very narrow and it's hard to navigate. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I think the bigger point I want to make about that is that we're not going to solve any social problem involving millions of people through a court petition process, right? We could have every lawyer in Michigan working on expungements all the time and not meet the need for record sealing that we have. There's an estimated 2 to 3 million Michigan residents have criminal convictions. That's in a state of 10 million people. There's about 45,000 to 50,000 new felony convictions every year and about 200,000 new misdemeanor convictions every year. And you can contrast that with the average number of people served through the court petition process annually, which has been about 3,000 a year in recent years. Next slide, please. So this is what Michigan's law was before the Clean Slate campaign. You could apply to seal your record with the court if you were 5 years or more from the end of your sentence or community supervision, and you've got no more than 1 felony or 2 misdemeanors on your record. And then the caveat there is not all convictions are eligible. Anything punishable by life in prison is not eligible. No criminal sexual conduct convictions are eligible currently. And at the time, no traffic cases were eligible either. And that was a big deal because traffic cases are half of all criminal cases in Michigan and among the most widespread and common convictions for people to have. So the other, in addition to being a pretty narrow law, and just to be clear, like if you had 3 misdemeanors in your entire life, you could not get a felony sealed under this old record. Or if you had 2 felonies, you couldn't get anything sealed. And it's extremely common for people to get charged with multiple things out of a single interaction with the police. You know, for example, if you're caught selling drugs, you're going to get charged with possession with intent to distribute and a conspiracy charge on top of that. And that's just standard practice. And it cut off access to expungement for many people. So in addition to the narrow scope, applications under this petition process were complicated, and many people felt they needed lawyers to navigate them. And some of the requirements, and we'll talk more about these later, but that were problematic. You know, first, you need to file your petition in the court that convicted you. So if you've moved, or if you got the conviction far away from your home, you had to find a way of filing it there and go back for the hearing. There are costs associated with it, you know, $150 to $200 for a lot of people, and that's just for court costs and costs of records and application costs. And the processing time is also significant. I have 6 months here. It's several months longer than that, I think, typically nowadays, for a variety of reasons. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, to sum up what the issues with the old law were. First, it was too narrow. Really significant categories of convictions weren't eligible at all. The process was too complex and resources intensive for many people to navigate, and it could not be operated at a scale sufficient to meet the need. The courts would just be overwhelmed trying to do, you know, even twice as much as they were before. Next slide, please. So one question we got frequently when we've talked about expungement in the past is, so what is the actual impact of an expungement on a person's life? And second, how do people who get expungements behave after their record is sealed? Because people have become very accustomed to relying on background checks, you know, in hiring and tenant vetting. And I think there's a public stigma around criminal convictions that I think gives some people pause when talking about sealing those records. So thankfully, a couple professors at the University of Michigan Law School decided to look into these questions a few years ago, and we got our hands on a draft of their paper around it was when we were planning the Clean Slate campaign in 2018, and their findings were really remarkable. You know, you can see finding one there. You know, less than 7% of eligible people engaged with the existing process, but the 2 and 3 I think were really, really important. First, you know, the economic impact is immediate and really significant. People saw their income increase on average 23% in the first year after they got their records sealed. And employment rates increased on average 11%. So what we see is a really significant impact on income and employment rates within the group of people that got their records sealed. And that, of course, is a group of people who historically have been unemployed and underemployed relative to the general population. And the third point, and this is like more of a technical term, but recidivism is a term that policy people use to talk about whether people reoffend. So if you've gotten in trouble, are you likely to commit another crime? And what this research showed is that the answer for people who received expungements was no. If they're actually compare favorably to the general public on future criminal activity. And that was really important because the sort of opposition to reforms like Clean Slate is almost always, fear that there's going to be an increase in crime because we're not being tough enough on people who have committed crimes. And it actually turns out that being tough on people tends to drive worse outcomes than actually helping meet people's needs and remove barriers to success. But that side of the debate hasn't really, it hasn't been part of the discussion on a lot of these laws historically. For the last 40 to 50 years, it's been pretty consistent. We need to be tougher on people. We need to be tough on crime. And thankfully, we're getting a more balanced, I think, discussion of these issues, and in particular of the unintended consequences of some of these tough on crime type policies. So the conclusion of this research paper, and I'll add that this was published by the Harvard Law Review the following year. And it's not the kind of paper they usually publish, but it was just that novel and that significant in its findings. So the conclusion was that expungements promote economic productivity and likely improve public safety. So policymakers should maximize expungements through automation. And what that means is getting a process that will sunset people's records without them having to do anything. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So Pennsylvania was really the innovator on criminal record sealing. There's a group of people at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia got together, and they had been working with clients with criminal records and on expungements, and came to be frustrated with the limitations of their process, which were similar to the ones we had here. And so they started to work on a solution. Say, why can't we just automatically seal records after a given amount of time? And there's actually a guy on their team who was a computer programmer before he went to law school. And he helped write some code sort of to do proof of concept. And it took him 6 years to get this law passed. But in 2018, Pennsylvania passed the first automatic expungement law. And the way it works is an algorithm is coded to the statutory eligibility criteria for record sealing. And what that means is it just says there's a waiting period. In Pennsylvania, it's 10 years from the end of your community supervision or sentence. And you just look at it, and you have a list of eligible convictions, and it just runs the list of eligible convictions through, and it runs, okay, who is 10 years or more out from a conviction like that, and it just generates a list, and that list is implemented by the courts. And if you can make the technology work, it operates at much lower cost and much greater impact than the current sort of court-based process. And so Pennsylvania's it's now been on the books for a few years. It wasn't implemented right away. There was some things that they needed to do within their court system to get ready. But I think it went live in 2020, and it's been going for a couple years now. And it's sealed millions of criminal records, more arrest records and charge records than conviction records, but a really significant impact nonetheless. And since that time, Utah has passed a law like that. Michigan has passed a law like that. That was part of this clean slate package that I'll talk about in a minute. And several other states have passed automatic record sealing laws since then, including Connecticut, Delaware, Colorado, I believe, passed one this year. So it's a really exciting time to be working on these issues because this automatic concept can help a lot of people. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislative campaign that we were a part of, and feel free to jump in with questions. You know, I am a registered lobbyist, and one of the things that I do is lobby legislators about laws like this. And I'm happy to talk about the politics of it, if that's of interest to you guys. So we were the lead organization for the Clean Slate campaign here. You know, we sort of wrote the campaign plan, raised money for it, that kind of thing. And we had a bunch of partners in the coalition to reform the expungement laws. You know, there's kind of, when I say inside and outside, it's kind of, that's like a Lansing way of talking, but sort of inside type support is the people who are typically lobbying in Lansing and have lobbyists and that kind of thing. Whereas outside support is more sort of like grassroots and community groups, you know, or organizations that have organized around sort of common goals, but don't have the sort of traditional access to power that the inside groups do. So, you know, the inside support was everybody from us to Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch network. Some other conservative groups, the Mackinac Center in Lansing, a bunch of business groups, including the Lansing Chamber of Commerce, Grand Rapids Chamber, Detroit Chamber, Saginaw Chamber, Small Business Association, and the like. And then a ton of great outside partners as well, including groups of formerly incarcerated people, such as Just Leadership USA, Nation Outside. Micah was part of the coalition as well, and did some great work as part of the campaign. Michigan Faith in Action, Detroit Justice Center, and many individuals who we met through the campaign. You know, we did with our partners, you know, I think it was 10 community listening sessions across the state, and ended up meeting a lot of people who had records that would benefit from the new law, and we're happy to come, you know, talk to lawmakers about them. Next slide, please. So we started the campaign in early 2019. So Michigan, and some of you may know this, but it's a little inside baseball. Michigan has 2-year legislative sessions. So 2019 was the start of the 19 to 20 legislative session. We started working on bill drafts in early 2019, and it took until September to actually get those introduced. There was lots of sort of work behind the scenes that needed to happen to sort of get skeptical lawmakers on board and talk to opposition groups and that kind of thing. So things finally got going in the fall of 2019, and they moved pretty quickly from there. We had hearings in the House in September and October, and the bill was voted out of the House by a 95-13 margin in early November. The bills kind of got a little sidetracked for a while after that. COVID was a part of it, because COVID hit in March of the following year. And then just there was stuff that needed to be worked out with the committee chair in the Senate. But we got those bills together for a hearing in June 2020, reported out in July, and then the Senate passed them in late September. The House consented to those changes, all by really strong votes. And Governor Whitmer signed the bills on October 12, 2020. Next slide, please. So there were two phases to what passed. The first one was a significant expansion of eligibility to petition. This is not the automatic expungement. This is just saying it should be easier to petition, and also a lot more people should be eligible. So sort of from the 5 years and 1 felony, 2 misdemeanor framework, this is kind of what came out of it. So they made traffic cases eligible. That's, again, half of all criminal cases, really important. Marijuana misdemeanors for possession and use were made immediately eligible, regardless of how old the convictions were, because in 2018, obviously, Michigan legalized marijuana. So there's about 240,000 of those convictions out there that were made newly eligible. They made the waiting period shorter from 5 years to 3 for misdemeanors. And they also made it possible for multiple convictions that arise out of the same event to count as a single conviction, instead of, multiplying these charges, having a negative impact on a person's eligibility. And then the bottom line was that you can get up to 3 felonies expunged, no limit on misdemeanors, but there are some restrictions on repeat offenses, or if you have multiple, more than 2 assaultive crimes on your record. So those reforms went into effect on April 11, 2021. That is because there was a 180-day effective date on the law. Normally it's a little bit shorter. Normally it's like 90. But they wrote in a bit longer one because they expected there would be a pretty significant increase in petitions being filed, and it turns out they were right about that. So that went into effect 6 months after the bills were signed. However, there was also an automatic expungement that passed. Next slide, please. And that has not gone into effect yet. There was a 2-year implementation period on that. And I'll talk in a little bit about why there was, but that is going into effect April 11, 2023. And so we're looking forward to that. The basics are, it's a 7-year waiting period for misdemeanors, a 10-year waiting period for felonies. You can get up to 2 nonviolent felonies automatically sealed from your record, 10 years from the end of sentence. And then for misdemeanors, there's a 2-tiered system. And I see a good question here. From the end of sentence, that's meant to include probation, because a lot of times you'll get a jail sentence with probation tacked onto it, and they want to go from whatever's later. That's the way they have applied that. So if you're coming out of jail, look to whether there's probation tacked on and how long that would be. If you're coming out of prison, look to parole. Some people do come out without any parole, usually because they've maxed out their sentence. But in general, it's going to be from the end of their community supervision. So there's 2 tiers for the misdemeanor eligibility. The first one basically is for your low-level misdemeanors, and that's anything punishable by less than 93 days. Those are getting sealed automatically just from the date of conviction. And that's because a lot of those are like traffic cases and ones that are not documented all that well. A lot of cops aren't fingerprinting people necessarily roadside on those kinds of cases. So the best records are actually in the local courts rather than the state police, which is where the official database is. But the state police database is organized around electronic fingerprints. So the fix on that was just to make a duty for the local courts to seal all such records when they're 7 years old. For the more serious misdemeanors, which are punishable by up to a year, you can seal up to 4 automatically after 7 years from the end of your probation in most cases. So I'll go to estimated impact, and this is the really exciting part of this law. Is it is going to have a 100-fold impact, greater than the petition system, because there's just no resource constraints on it. It just helps everybody who's eligible. So the estimates we've gotten from partner organizations are 500,000 to 1 million people will get their conviction records sealed as a result of this law. So that's like between 20 to 40% of everybody with convictions in Michigan. It's a very significant remedy for these old convictions. So we're excited about that. Next slide, please. So just looking back 1 year in, I apologize. So we saw 2,500 to 3,000 petitions filed annually prior to this past year. And we heard from the AG's office that there were 10,000 last year. And I can tell you guys that we as an organization helped with about 2,000 of those in one way or another. Kamau has been doing expungement fairs across the state for months. It's actually going to the UP this week for the first time, which is exciting. But there's been an incredible, just upswell of support for expungement. We've been partnering with a bunch of legal aid organizations, a bunch of community partners, and it's been really exciting to be a part of that. We also helped pass expansion of the eligibility for DUI offenses. Basically, DUIs and moving violations causing injury or death were not made eligible under the Clean Slate law, but DUI is such a common conviction, and it affects so many people that we really thought it was important to at least get first offense DUIs eligible. And so that was passed and went into effect last February. And that, again, was estimated to be 200,000 people impacted. We haven't seen that many people sort of come to our fairs. I think, Kamau would say it's a very narrow expansion, but we're pretty sure the people are out there. So it's important for people to know that they can get their DUIs expunged. Next slide, please. So there are a bunch of questions we tend to get asked about the automatic expungement. And I just want to run through them quickly. We do have, I can see our colleague Kate put in the chat. We have a fact sheet on the Clean Slate law generally, and also one on DUI. And they answer a number of questions that I won't cover here. If those are useful to you guys, please do check them out. So just briefly, the automatic expungement will become effective about a year from now. It's April 11, 2023. There was a 2-year implementation period because while writing an algorithm is easy, getting courts to actually implement, automatically sealing thousands of records is much more complicated. And the reason for that is the state police holds the official record of conviction, and then they run the algorithm on their data and they send it to the courts. But there are 17 or more different case management systems in the courts, and many of the courts have extremely outdated computer systems whereby the ability to simply take a huge amount of data and process it within their systems isn't something they can do right now, or is something that they need help to do. So the lawmakers and others, sort of other stakeholders involved in the legislative discussion, decided there needed to be a 2-year wait on the effective date. And from what I've heard, that is a good idea, and it's still they're still struggling a little bit to fully grasp how much work there needs to be done to roll it out on April 11 of next year. But we are involved in those discussions too, and we're trying to move them along. And we've got some support from a national organization called Code for America that has helped other states with their clean slate implementation, and has made themselves available to help us too. I think the how will I know question is actually like a trickier question than it should be, but there is not a good way for courts to find people and let them know that their record has been cleared, because courts don't keep track of where people live. So there's not actually going to be letters coming from the courts to the people who have their records sealed. People are going to need to have a way to confirm that their record has in fact been sealed. And we are working with the administration to put together a resource like that. But until that is up and running, the way to figure out whether your record's been sealed is going to be to do your own background check, basically. And the state police has a tool for that, but there's a fee for service. So we're looking at setting up something similar that's free, but that has not been worked out yet. So there's going to be more to say on that. The fifth question, what about commercial background check companies' records? That's a great question, because many of these background check companies, whether it be like LexisNexis or Checker, whatever, they gather their data by aggregating court records. And they wouldn't necessarily be carefully updating all of their records, and they could be incorrectly reporting records, or reporting records that have been sealed. So I think there may be additional legislation happening on this at some point, but the background check companies know that they have legal obligations to give consumers accurate information. There's also federal statute that applies to them. It's called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So if Michigan Clean Slate goes into effect and the background check companies do not comply, and they don't update their records the way they need to, they're likely going to get investigated by the state or by the Federal Trade Commission. So I'll leave it at that. And I believe that's my last slide. So next slide, please. Okay. Kamau, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, John. And thank you everyone for having this. So I'm just gonna touch on some of the offenses that cannot be expunged via the automatic expungement program. As the slide indicates, assaultive crimes, serious misdemeanors, crimes of dishonesty, convictions punishable by 10 years or more cannot be automatically expunged. And I want to emphasize automatic expungement because, as John mentioned, we're currently in phase 1 of the Clean Slate Act, which deals with the petition process. So, for example, I may not be able to automatically expunge a felonious assault or an assault and battery, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a person cannot petition the court to have the same offense expunged under the law. All right, so again, this just strictly deals with the offenses that are ineligible for automatic expungement. An example of an assaultive crime, as I mentioned, would be a felonious assault, assault and battery, serious misdemeanor. Oftentimes, you'll find that assaultive crimes also fall under serious misdemeanors as well. Um, so they're kind of interchangeable in that sense. Crimes of dishonesty, when you're thinking about crimes of dishonesty, the statute defines what it is, but we're looking at offenses like embezzlement, um, racketeering, those types of offenses that are designated as crimes of dishonesty will not be eligible for automatic expungement. But again, that doesn't mean that the person cannot potentially apply to have that conviction expunged. The other last point on the slide is any conviction punishable by 10 years or more cannot be automatically expunged. Sometimes that isn't always clear, and you often have to look at the statute or the convicting statute to figure out what the maximum punishment was. But um, obviously you're looking at offenses that are serious in nature. So, like the example I would use would be home invasion, second degree, which is a 15-year felony offense. That offense would not be eligible for automatic expungement, but again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person cannot apply to have that conviction expunged. Next slide. All right, so a lot of John mentioned earlier that my role at Safe and Just Michigan is primarily liaising with community organizations, various legal aid partners around the state to help coordinate and plan expungement fairs around the state. And that often involves running a background check on the person to confirm that they are eligible. So the individual will come to the fair, we'll run their iChat. We will then have an attorney review their iChat to determine whether or not they are eligible. And then if they are eligible, we will then assist them with filling out the application form that you're seeing on the slide right now. Thing about these forms is it allows you to put all of the convictions out of a particular court on that one form. So what that means is if I have multiple convictions out of multiple courts, then that means I have to fill out separate applications for each court. There are some additional things that go along with filing for an expungement. The applicant has to get fingerprinted. You can often get fingerprinted through the state police or your local police station. The individual gets fingerprinted and it's placed on a fingerprint card that they can then take with them. And there's a $50 fee as well. That $50 fee is for the state police. When you file for an expungement, you have to essentially mail copies of the application to the state police, the prosecutor that prosecuted you for the offense, and then the Attorney General's office. The state police, however, they, in addition to getting the application, they also get a fingerprint card with your fingerprints on it, along with a $50 check or money order made out to the state of Michigan. It's essentially a fingerprint processing fee. The thing about that is it's $50 per application. So if somebody has 4 different offenses in 4 different courts and you filled out 4 different applications, it's $50 per application. So you're looking at potentially $200 for that one person. So it can be, somewhat cumbersome, and if, that's a lot of money. So sometimes people can't afford that. There are some programs in place. I know Michigan has a program in place that allows for them to pay the fingerprint processing fee on behalf of the client. So that's something that you can look into if you believe that you have a client or an individual that would need assistance with paying that fee. Once the application is filed, a hearing date will be scheduled, and at that hearing, the judge will basically have to, the applicant, I should say, has to basically convince the judge that their post-conviction behavior justifies setting aside the conviction. So even if a person is in fact eligible, that in and of itself doesn't mean that the court will just grant the expungement. And that's the thing with the petition process, unlike the automatic expungement process. You have to go in front of a judge and you basically have to convince the judge or show the judge why you changed your life, you're reformed, and how, kind of show the judge why you're a benefit to society through your actions. So sometimes people will submit letters of recommendation, resumes, anything kind of speaking to what they've been doing since the conviction in question. Next slide.
We had a question in the chat. Someone was asking how long that process usually takes.
So I think, as John mentioned earlier, what we're seeing is the entire process from filing of the application to actually having the hearing can be as long as 6 months. And the reason that is because with all of these petitions being filed all at once, the courts and the state police, the attorney general's office, they're having difficulty processing these applications fast enough to keep up with the demand. There is the law basically says that the judge can't make a decision without having seen or having received a response from the state police. So when you file your application and you send in the fingerprint card and the $50 to the state police, they will then run another background check on you using your fingerprints, and that will generate a lien report, which stands for law enforcement information network. And that report is then sent to the judge, and that's how the judge knows, all right, John Smith is eligible or John Smith is not eligible for whatever reason. So because there have been delays with respect to generating that report, what you'll find is that a lot of these hearings have to be adjourned because the court is still waiting on the state police to send in their report. Now, in fairness to the state police, they've gotten a lot better with respect to generating that report, and it's not taking as long as it was originally or at the beginning or when Clean Slate went into effect. But right now, the issue is mainly with the Attorney General's office because they are having difficulty sending in their response to the court as well. So that's another component of this as well. The Attorney General's office normally writes a letter to the judge basically confirming whether or not this person is eligible. Some courts are willing to move forward with the hearing even if the Attorney General's response hasn't been received. But what we find is that most courts want to at least have some response from the Attorney General's office before they make a decision on the person's eligibility and whether they should have the expungement granted or not. So that's really where the holdup is. And to the extent that process can be improved, I think we'll see more of these petitions being processed faster, obviously, and hopefully that will mean more people getting their records expunged through the petition process. And I think the delays with the processing times also kind of highlight the importance of getting the automatic expungement system up and running, because that will hopefully alleviate some of the stress that the court system is feeling right now as a result of all of these petitions being filed all at once.
Okay, thank you. We had two more in the chat. One was if you could restate the resource that you told us about that can help with the fingerprinting cost possibly. And then the other question is they're asking if you mentioned time and location scheduled for people to get assistance with this paperwork, which I assume is all of the expungement fairs you're doing.
Right. So for the first question, I mentioned Michigan Works. Now, obviously, I don't know if you're familiar with Michigan Works, but each Michigan Works services particular counties. So, there'll be a different Michigan Works for a particular county. So you would really have to contact that Michigan Works to kind of see what their program entails and how they can assist that person potentially with paying the $50 for the fingerprinting. But Michigan Works would be the resource. Second question is with respect to the expungement fairs. I think Kate just put it in the chat. We have like an event page on our website, which kind of shows you when our next expungement fairs are coming up. As John mentioned, I'll be in the UP this week. We're doing 3 fairs up in the UP this week. And I think in June, we plan on having a couple expungement fairs in the Oakland area, and then one in Inkster for sure at the end of June. And again, those can be found on the event page of Safe and Just Michigan's website.
Thank you
The
so
other thing-
much.
The other thing I would note, obviously, expungement fairs are a great resource, but we've partnered with a number of legal aid organizations that handle these expungement cases year round. So you could potentially, depending on what county you live in, you could direct people to the legal aid that services that county for assistance with their expungement case as well. So they don't have to wait for an expungement fair necessarily. All right. Next slide, please. So yeah, this slide basically kind of talks about what I just mentioned earlier with respect to the processing times and the delays that we've seen with respect to these petitions and why it's basically taken so long in some cases to have these applications processed by the court. So we can go to the next slide. So these are just some of the, legal resources. As I mentioned, we partnered with, I want to say 5 or 6 legal aids around the state, and they do these fairs year round. And feel free to reach out to any one of those legal aids around the state that can assist with these expungement cases. And again, you don't have to wait for one of our expungement fairs to kind of initiate the process. Next slide. All right, and yeah, this is this slide basically kind of reiterates what I just mentioned. These are the legal aid entities that we partnered with, and again, I would encourage anyone to kind of reach out to them for assistance if need be. So one of the things we wanted to do was to kind of show people a couple eye chats or background checks, just to kind of familiarize people with the process. And I'm not sure if anyone has ever run a background check or they've seen one. I'm happy to show you guys a couple just so that you're familiar with everything. Allison, I can share my screen.
Yep, that works perfectly. If you would like to, Eleanor will stop sharing and you can share to show us an iChat. That'd be great.
So all right, so you should be able to see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right, This is what an iChat looks like. What I really want to focus on is the various segments on an iChat. So first of all, iChat is run by the Michigan State Police. Basically, how it should work normally is when somebody's convicted of a crime, the court reports it to the state police, and then the state police puts it on that person's background check. There are three components to an iChat. You'll notice there's an arrest segment. This middle segment is called the charge segment. And then this segment is called the judicial segment. When somebody comes to an expungement fair, this is what we're running in order to determine whether or not this person is eligible or not. So really what we're focused on from an expungement standpoint is identifying how many convictions they have in total on their record and what types of convictions they have, because that's going to also play a role in, whether or not they are eligible. So in this slide, you'll see under the judicial segment, this person has a 1991 felony. Which is an example. Let me show you this one. This person has a 2014 felony case, and what you'll notice is it's one case, but they pled guilty to multiple counts. You may have heard John mention the one bad night rule or the same transaction rule. Under the new law, there's a mechanism that allows you to potentially count multiple felony offenses that arise from the same incident as one offense. So in this case, on the surface, it looks like this person has 1, 2, 3, 4 felonies. But again, this person could potentially be eligible under the one bad night exception because these 4 felonies could count as one. The reason why this is significant, especially in this person's case, is if you have more than 3 felonies under the law, you are deemed to be ineligible. So again, if you just look at this on the surface, it would look like this person is ineligible, but this person may be able to take advantage of the one bad night loophole. The problem with the one bad night loophole is you can't really make a determination just by looking at somebody's background check. You would really have to screen that person in person. You'd have to talk to them in person, potentially review court records, police reports, because in order to establish a one bad night argument, you have to not only show that it arose from the same incident, you have to also show that the convictions occurred within 24 hours of one another. All right, so this is just an example of an iChat with a potential one bad night situation.
Thank you. We have a couple of general questions in the chat. So someone was asking if their client has their record sealed through an expungement fair, but the record shows up on a background check, such as a housing application. Who should the client reach out to, or what action should they take to resolve this?
So, that's important to know. So they won't actually get their conviction expunged at the expungement fair. We'll just get them started with the process, and then they'll normally either have to file for the expungement at a later date, or we'll put them in contact with one of our legal aid partners, and the legal aid entity will then file the application for them. In any event, though, if they're successful with the application, normally what happens is the judge will sign an order saying that it's been expunged, and then they will send that order to the state police, and the state police will remove it from their background check. So for example, this iChat that we're looking at right now, if this person was successful, the entire thing should be removed from their record. Having said that, and John alluded to this earlier, is Sometimes you have private background checks that don't always update their system. So it would really, in that case, the person would have to identify what iChat or what background check resource was used. Did they use iChat or did they use a private background check service? If the conviction is still showing up on their iChat, I would encourage that person to notify the court, and the court will normally resend the paperwork to the state police, and then they'll remove it. Where it gets trickier is the private background check people. The courts don't notify them. I know John mentioned that there's some potential legislation in place that would possibly change that. So in that scenario, the applicant normally has to serve or send some type of notice to the private background check people that the conviction has been expunged. And then once they get notice legally, they're supposed to remove it from that person's record.
So I know John said that when the automatic expungements go through, people won't be receiving letters. If you go to an expungement fair or get it expunged on your own somehow before that happens, do you get like proof of that or a piece of paper or anything you can keep for this kind of situation?
Right. So normally the judge will sign an order saying this case has been expunged. And that would be your proof that, at least the expungement was granted. Sometimes what people will do is like 2 or 3 months after the expungement has been granted, they'll rerun another iChat to make sure that the conviction has been removed from their background check. So that's what they would normally do for kids like that.
Okay, thank you. And then we have one more question in the chat that says, in Michigan, will expungement be offered for any sexual offenses? Example, urinating in public, or sexual offenses that were prior to the implementation of the sexual offense laws, or will these not be included in the eligibility for expungement? So I believe they're asking about the criminal sexual conduct charges.
So generally speaking, and John mentioned this as well, most CSC offenses cannot be expunged, period, and that goes for like CSC 1, 2, and 3. There is an exception for CSC 4 except convictions if they occurred before January 12, 2015. There is a narrow exception for that CSC 4 offense. And even then, there are some more issues that that person has to jump through before they can get that expunged. But, public urination, for example, that in and of itself isn't considered sex offense. So that person would potentially be eligible to get that expunged. Now, if it was connected to something more serious in nature, or if they were charged under CSC statute, that would change things. But the offense in and of, the offense of public urination isn't excluded under the law.
Okay, those are all the questions we have in the chat for now. If you want to stop sharing your screen, Eleanor can share the last video we have. If you have questions, please add them to the chat while we show this video. That would be really helpful. Eleanor, if you want to stop sharing, we can't hear that and it's really choppy. I'll share it. So if you just give me 1 sec, everyone. Ask questions, talk amongst yourselves. I'll pull it up really quick.
Having a felony
There we
record.
go. Perfect.
It's the single worst thing that could have happened to me. It's like the scarlet A that you wear on your chest forever. You don't get any reprieve from that. Being a poor black kid in a black neighborhood, selling weed was what helped us to pay the light bill. The night I got arrested, police pulled up in the side door. They kicked in the side door there, and yeah, this is where it all took place at. Now I'm on my way to jail at 23 years old. I did not in that moment understand the long-term implications of what being a felon meant. The felony conviction was on my record for almost 20 years. Not only was it hindering me from getting jobs, but I mean, it was hindering the time that I got to spend in my own children's lives. You can't volunteer to be the kid's basketball coach because I now had to check this box as a felon. I've dedicated and devoted my entire life to making sure more kids that grow up in the community I grew up in don't fall victim. We started TCB in 2008. It was just an after-school program to create opportunities for kids. Kids were getting involved. They were volunteering around the city. They were changing the climate. I got my record expunged in 2021. The judge that expunged my felonies was the prosecuting attorney on the case 20 years ago. To have the same person that ended my life be the person that breathed life back into me, it was nuts. The thing that caused me the most pain is the thing that gave birth to the best work that I've done in my life. It's because of great organizations like Safe and Just to open the door of opportunity. Having these felonies off of my record, I feel like the fat kid who's not fat anymore.
Many people.
All right, I am not seeing any more videos come in. Or not videos, gosh, questions come into the chat. So unless there's anything else that either of you want to share, that's all that Micah has today.
No, thanks for having us. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions about the Clean Slate laws. We've got great resources. And I think Kamau may actually be like the statewide expert on this at this point. So no better place to go for information.
All right, well, I want to thank all of our attendees for taking time out of their day. I know that you're all super busy, but when you attend these webinars, then you have more information to help do your job more effectively. So I really appreciate you taking the time for that. I want to thank our speakers for their expertise and their time as well. They do this for free for us, so we really, really appreciate that. We had over 70 folks in the webinar today, and like I said, the recording will be on our YouTube page, so feel free to send it on to other folks. And then one last plug, we have one free webinar a month. So June is on the eviction process, July is working with criminal sexual offenders, and we have one more paid training this year. All right, well, thank you everyone. That's the end of our webinar. Bye-bye. That's okay.